Welcome to Byte-Sized Tech, where we blend casual conversations with insightful discussions on the latest in technology and gadgets.
Great to be diving in again.
So today we're tackling some pretty hefty topics. We've got the semiconductor sector lots happening there with export controls, tariffs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a complex web, definitely.
Yeah.
Politics, tech, global trade, all tangled up.
And then switching gears completely, Lyft is making a big move, expanding into Europe for the first time.
Right, acquiring Free Now, a big step for them.
Okay, so our mission, as always, is to sort of unpack all this, pull out the key stuff, make sense of it.
Exactly. Let's get into it. Where should we start? The chips.
Yeah, let's start with the chips. These new U.S. export controls aimed at China, they seem pretty serious. NVIDIA and AMD, they're taking big write-downs.
Oh, yeah. Huge numbers. We're hearing NVIDIA wrote down something like $5.5 billion, and AMD around $800 million. That's just in the first quarter.
Wow. So what's the trigger for that? Just new rules saying you can't sell these specific chips to China anymore?
Pretty much. It's about updated licensing requirements for certain advanced chips, especially the ones, slightly modified for the Chinese market.
And the U.S. government's goal is what? Slow down China's AI development?
That seems to be the main driver, yes. Slowing progress in AI, supercomputing, and also there's a big push to encourage chip manufacturing to come back to the U.S.
Right, the reshoring idea. But it's interesting, these chips they're restricting, even the scaled-down ones are proving useful for AI development elsewhere, like that DeepSeek example.
That's the kicker, isn't it?
Yeah.
You try to restrict the absolute cutting edge, but even slightly less powerful chips, well, they can still do a lot, especially in emerging AI areas. It was a bit of a maybe wake-up call.
So the restrictions maybe weren't quite targeted enough initially, or the tech just moves too fast?
Probably a bit of both. And it definitely caught parts of the industry, maybe investors too, bit by surprise.
We heard from an investor, Denny, who made some sharp points. He mentioned NVIDIA's China revenue dropping hard, like from over a quarter down to maybe single digits soon.
Yeah, that tracks. China was a huge market, going from, 26% in 2022 down to 13% now. And yeah, potentially single digits. That's significant.
He also mentioned this diffusion rule. What's that about? Sounds complicated.
It adds another layer. Basically, it limits how many high-performance GPUs any single buyer can get.
Yeah.
Trying to stop people from just, buying lots of slightly less powerful chips and linking them together to get around the rules.
Oh, okay. Closing loopholes. But then he also raised this counter-argument. Could these rules actually end up helping Huawei? Because they make their own chips in China already.
That's the big risk, and it's a really valid point. If Chinese companies can't buy from NVIDIA or AMD, they might just double down on domestic suppliers like Huawei. You could, inadvertently boost your competitor.
Seems like a tricky balancing act, penalizing U.S. firms while potentially strengthening a Chinese rival.
Exactly. It highlights how complex these controls are and, the potential for unintended consequences.
And this ties back to bringing manufacturing here. TSMC building that huge plant in Arizona, that's a big win, right?
Definitely a positive step. Getting leading-edge manufacturing capability on U.S. soil is a major strategic goal.
But there are cost concerns. Maybe tariffs on equipment needed to make the chips. Could that offset the benefits?
That's the worry. Manufacturing in the U.S. might be more expensive initially, and potential tariffs add another layer of cost. Though some argue AI productivity gains could help absorb that down the line.
Okay, let's pivot to ASML. The Dutch company, they make the machines that make the chips, right? The really complex lithography ones.
The absolute key player. They make the EUV machines, the most advanced ones. Essential.
And they missed their booking targets recently by nearly $1 billion.
Yeah, that raised some eyebrows.
Yeah.
And crucially, they said they couldn't really quantify the potential impact of tariffs on their business.
That sounds like a big problem. If one of their machines costs, up to $380 million, a tariff could add tens, even hundreds of millions.
Precisely. A potential 25% tariff, like figures floated under a possible Trump administration, on a $380 million machine. That's almost $95 million extra cost per machine.
Ouch. And ASML thinks their customers, the chip makers like Intel, TSMC, Samsung, would just have to eat that cost.
That's what they suggested, yeah. Which, in turn, could slow down how quickly those companies build new factories or expand. Creates a lot of uncertainty.
It sounds like their CEO got grilled on this during their earnings call, trying to figure out what the U.S. actually wants with these potential tariffs.
Right. Is the goal to change behavior, bring specific manufacturing steps back, or just raise revenue? ASML needs clarity to plan.
Because ASML doesn't think tariffs on their machines will stop the U.S. building AI infrastructure, right? Or stop leading-edge chips being made.
Their argument is basically, you need our machines anyway.
Mm.
Taxing them just makes it more expensive for everyone, including the U.S. companies building fabs here.
And they also pointed out, look, we're not moving final assembly from the Netherlands, and TSMC isn't moving its most advanced stuff wholesale from Taiwan. There are limits.
Yeah, these are incredibly complex operations, deeply rooted ecosystems. You can't just pick them up and move them easily. There are these hub limits.
But interestingly, some key parts of their machines, like the light source for EUV, are already made in the U.S.
Correct, in San Diego, actually. So maybe there's scope to increase that kind of component manufacturing in the U.S. rather than the whole machine assembly. That seems more feasible.
Okay, let's bring in the White House angle. Michael Kratsios, advisor to the president, talked about a promote and protect strategy.
Right. Promote U.S. leadership through R&D investment. AI, quantum nuclear were mentioned, and protect those leads with things like export controls.
A balanced agenda, he called it. But how does that balance work when the protect part, the export controls, might be hurting the promote part by hitting U.S. companies' revenue?
That's the tension. The administration sees controls on certain NVIDIA AMD chips going to China as necessary protection because they could potentially be used in supercomputers for military applications.
Even if the industry argues they're lower performance chips and it just pushes China towards Huawei.
That's the ongoing debate. The industry worries about losing market share and accelerating Chinese domestic capabilities. The government prioritizes national security concerns. It's a tough needle to thread.
And on bringing manufacturing back, Kratsios emphasized that, but didn't really answer about potential tariff exemptions for essential equipment like ASMLs.
That lack of clarity on exemptions is a key sticking point. It suggests they're still figuring out how to best incentivize domestic production without making it prohibitively expensive.
He also touched briefly on AI and copyright. Models learning from copyrighted stuff. Sounds like that conversation is ongoing.
Very much so. It's a huge legal and ethical area. How do you balance innovation with creators' rights? That's going to be debated for a while.
Okay. Big shift now. Let's talk ride sharing.
Yeah.
Lyft. They just got free now in Europe for $200 million.
Yep, their first move outside the U.S. and Canada. Pretty significant expansion.
Why now? And why free now?
Well, Lyft CEO said they feel they're in a strong position domestically now, so it's the right time to go global. And Free Now gives them instant access across Europe, especially deep ties within the taxi industry there.
Right. They mentioned half of European taxi rides are still booked offline. That's a massive market to digitize, doubling their addressable market, basically.
Huge potential, yeah. Integrating Free Now's network and tech could really tap into that offline segment.
But let's be real. The scale difference compared to Uber in Europe is pretty big, isn't it?
Well,
Lyft's total bookings are way higher than Free Now's currently, and Uber's driver network is vast.
Absolutely. Uber has a massive head start in Europe. Lyft isn't going head-to-head on pure scale initially. Free Now brings local strength, particularly with taxis, which is a different angle. They mentioned a $40 billion total mobility market in Europe they're targeting.
And Free Now is profitable. That's unusual for these acquisitions.
It is. And it was previously owned by Mercedes and BMW, right? So there's likely some solid tech and operational expertise baked in there from the automotive world. Maybe some fresh energy now with Lyft taking over.
Interesting that the initial news didn't really talk about autonomous driving, given the BMW-Mercedes connection and Europe being a target for AVs eventually.
Yeah, that was noted, but the CEO did clarify later. He said autonomous in Europe is still years down the road, but it's definitely part of the long-term plan.
So how does Free Now help with that?
He pointed to Free Now's existing relationships with regulators across different European countries and their experience managing fleets. That's all crucial groundwork for deploying autonomous vehicles later on.
Makes sense. Just quickly, Lyft's also dealing with an activist investor, Engine Capital.
Seems so, yeah. But the CEO sounded pretty confident, pointing to things like their share buyback program and, well, this big international expansion as signs they're delivering value.
Okay, so wrapping up. Semiconductors are in this really volatile state. U.S.-China tensions, export controls, tariff uncertainty impacting giants like NVIDIA, AMD, ASML.
A lot of moving pieces, definitely. High stakes with huge implications for future tech development and global supply chains.
And meanwhile, Lyft's making a bold bet on Europe, hoping Free Now gives them the foothold they need to compete globally, even against entrenched players like Uber.
Yeah, two really different stories, but both showing how tech companies are navigating, complex global markets, regulations, and competitive pressures.
So, thinking about all this complexity, the US-China tech rivalry lifts European gamble. What do you think could be the biggest unexpected development in tech over the next year? Something out of left field.
That's a good one. Maybe. Maybe we see a surprisingly fast advancement in non-silicon-based computing that sidesteps some current chip bottlenecks. Or perhaps a major European city introduces regulations that completely shake up the ride-sharing or autonomous vehicle landscape in an unforeseen way. It's hard to predict the surprises.
Always keeps things interesting.
For sure.
Thanks for tuning in to Byte-Sized Tech. If you enjoyed the episode, like, comment, share, and subscribe for more fun tech discussions.